The absence of skills is often perceived as the first wall that separates ambition from execution. Yet, in the modern digital age, that wall has become more transparent than ever. The individual who possesses no technical ability, no specialized training, and no initial resources is no longer excluded from creation, only from the old logic of creation. What has changed is not human capability itself, but the accessibility of knowledge and tools that emulate expertise. To start with nothing is to face the raw essence of innovation, necessity combined with curiosity. This combination has historically shaped every major leap in civilization. When a person decides to begin a business with zero skills, they enter a psychological territory defined less by what they lack and more by what they are willing to learn. The absence of competence becomes an opening, a blank space where intelligence can be borrowed, structured, and amplified through external systems, especially artificial intelligence. The rise of AI and internet-based platforms has reconstructed what learning means. Previously, one required years of training, apprenticeships, and financial investment to reach a minimal level of proficiency. Now, through the right prompts, a person can temporarily access synthetic expertise, not by mastering a field, but by instructing an algorithm to simulate mastery. This shift is not merely technological, it is philosophical. It redefines the concept of ownership of knowledge. The entrepreneur without skills becomes the curator of intelligence rather than its creator. This inversion, from doing to directing, represents the new logic of entrepreneurship. Instead of accumulating traditional skills, the modern beginner orchestrates interactions between digital systems, data, and human intention. The central question changes from "what can I do" to "what can I coordinate?" Such coordination becomes the primary skill of the skillless. It transforms ignorance into direction and direction into output. The key is not expertise but clarity, the ability to ask the right question to the right system. However, the emotional impact of beginning without ability cannot be ignored. The human mind has been conditioned for centuries to associate value with labor, mastery, and measurable effort. When that association is disrupted by AI collaboration, the individual faces an identity conflict. If I do not possess the skills, do I deserve the success that comes from them? This psychological tension often defines the early stages of the modern entrepreneur. The challenge is not the technology itself, but the reconciliation between self-worth and external assistance. In this context, the phrase "starting from zero" becomes symbolic rather than literal. Zero no longer represents absence, but potential. It is the moment before configuration, the raw material of digital creation. A person without skills who learns to guide algorithms, to analyze AI outputs, and to design through iteration does not remain unskilled. They evolve into a meta-learner. Their skill becomes adaptability. They no longer need to know how to do everything, only how to think about everything systematically. Why does this matter? Because it decentralizes opportunity. It removes the gatekeepers of expertise who historically filtered who could create, publish, and scale. Today, access replaces ability as the true currency of entrepreneurship. The only prerequisite is internet connection, the new threshold of potential. When connectivity becomes universal, creativity becomes democratized. And this democratization generates an economic and philosophical revolution. It challenges the very definition of merit. The impact on the plot of the modern economy is profound. Businesses built from zero are no longer anomalies. They are prototypes of a new model of value creation. In this model, the entrepreneur acts as a designer of flows. Information flows, automated processes, and customer experiences generated not by manual expertise, but by system integration. The absence of traditional skills thus becomes a form of purity, allowing for creativity unburdened by convention. In the intersection between ignorance and intelligence lies the new frontier of entrepreneurship. The unskilled founder becomes a philosopher of process, someone who questions not how to do something, but why it must be done a certain way. the use of AI transforms the question from can I to how efficiently can it be simulated. The answer, almost always, is that it can. Therefore, beginning a business with zero skills is not a statement of incapacity, but of redefinition. It is a deliberate act of abstraction, transforming what was once human effort into algorithmic collaboration. And through that collaboration, the boundaries between knowing and creating blur completely. The human without skills becomes the orchestrator of infinite possibility. The progression from ignorance to insight is rarely linear. When a person begins a business without any defined skill, what unfolds is not a sequence of actions, but a sequence of realizations. The initial discovery is that information alone is insufficient. Transformation requires structure. This is where artificial intelligence and the internet function not only as resources, but as frameworks that discipline creativity. They turn scattered ideas into systematic procedures. The first internal confrontation arises when the individual realizes that knowing about something is not equivalent to knowing how to implement it. This distinction has always separated thinkers from builders. Yet in the digital era, that division collapses. The unskilled entrepreneur can now design through simulation. The algorithm becomes both mentor and mirror, offering not static answers but dynamic feedback loops. Each iteration, each query, teaches the human how to refine intention, clarify logic, and construct results. This process is less about mastery and more about pattern recognition. The human role transforms from executor to observer, the one who detects relationships between inputs and outcomes. Success then becomes a form of cognitive patterning, a rhythm established between question and response. Artificial intelligence accelerates this rhythm until learning becomes indistinguishable from creating. But why does this transformation matter? Because it introduces a new definition of capability. Traditional education taught that skill is stored within individuals, as muscle memory, technique, or years of repetition. The new model externalizes skill into systems. It is no longer necessary to internalize a craft. It is enough to understand how to navigate the architecture that performs it. In this sense, the modern entrepreneur operates as a conductor of digital orchestras. Each tool becomes an instrument, and coordination replaces performance. The philosophical consequence is profound. Expertise becomes distributed. No single person owns the process entirely. Instead, creation becomes a collective intelligence, where human intuition merges with machine precision. This hybrid cognition changes how society perceives achievement. The myth of the self-made entrepreneur dissolves into a more complex truth, that success is co-created between human will and algorithmic execution. However, dependency on external intelligence introduces its own fragility. When every function is delegated to an interface, the entrepreneur risks disconnection from the essence of creation. The absence of tactile learning can produce cognitive detachment. One begins to understand results but not mechanisms. This detachment may lead to superficial understanding, a surface-level fluency that imitates depth. Yet the paradox is that such superficiality can still generate profound outcomes. Artificial intelligence compensates for the user's lack of foundational skill by supplying depth algorithmically. This creates an illusion of expertise, but also an opportunity for real evolution. If the user chooses to study the system's behavior, they begin to absorb meta-knowledge, the logic of automation itself. Through observation, ignorance becomes analytical literacy. This is the crucial inflection point, the transition from dependency to comprehension. The entrepreneur begins to recognize that AI is not a substitute for intelligence, but a multiplier of intention. It amplifies clarity. It rewards precise thinking and punishes vague ambition. Every poorly formulated prompt exposes cognitive noise. Every successful output reveals structured thought. The dialogue with AI becomes a form of self-education, revealing how the mind operates when translated into language. Why does this matter for business creation? Because the market now rewards speed, synthesis, and adaptability more than traditional craftsmanship. To move from concept to product no longer requires full technical knowledge, only the capacity to convert abstract goals into executable prompts. The absence of skills becomes an advantage when it eliminates overthinking and perfectionism. The unskilled creator acts faster, experiments more, and learns directly from feedback rather than theory. This dynamic redefines failure. When experiments can be simulated endlessly at low cost, failure loses its emotional weight. It becomes data. The entrepreneur without skills thus develops resilience through iteration. They understand that each attempt is not a setback, but a recalibration of logic. This mindset, analytical rather than emotional, is the cornerstone of the AI age entrepreneur. Still, such empowerment requires philosophical balance. Over-reliance on automation risks the erosion of intuition, and intuition remains the only non-replicable human element. The wise entrepreneur learns to alternate between analytical design and emotional vision, between synthetic logic and organic perception. Without this equilibrium, the project may become efficient but soulless. With it, the creator can produce outcomes that feel both precise and alive. Ultimately, building a business without skills is an experiment in cognitive engineering. It tests how far human intention can extend when amplified by systems that think differently. It transforms the act of not knowing into the art of learning while building. Every digital prompt becomes a mirror reflecting the evolution of thought. The unskilled individual, through structured curiosity, becomes a philosopher of creation, a designer of invisible architectures. The journey continues not as mastery, but as continual adaptation. The business evolves with the tools, and the individual evolves with the process. What began as incapacity becomes methodology. What began as doubt becomes direction. The absence of skill, when paired with intelligence, both artificial and human, becomes the foundation of limitless experimentation. When the business begins to function, the paradox of creation without skills becomes fully visible. What once seemed impossible, to generate value without traditional competence, transforms into an observable system. At this stage, the question is no longer how to begin, but how to sustain and evolve. Sustainability in the context of the unskilled entrepreneur is not about stability, it is about dynamic adaptation. Stability assumes mastery, adaptation assumes intelligence. To maintain a structure built upon borrowed intelligence, one must learn to manage flow. The entrepreneur becomes a strategist of movement, of data, communication, and emotion. Unlike traditional business owners, whose strength lies in repetition and expertise, the new creator relies on observation and flexibility. They must sense when systems begin to stagnate, when the automation loses relevance, and when human creativity must intervene again. This phase reveals an essential truth. The absence of skills does not eliminate responsibility. In fact, it amplifies it. When one delegates creation to machines, one also assumes the ethical responsibility of direction. Artificial intelligence will execute with precision, but without conscience. The entrepreneur's new role, therefore, is to supply the missing conscience, to ensure that efficiency does not erase empathy, that optimization does not destroy meaning. Why does this matter? Because progress without moral design becomes hollow. The temptation of automation lies in its promise of effortlessness, but effortlessness can dissolve purpose. The unskilled founder must remain vigilant, continuously redefining the why behind every operation. When that reflection disappears, the system may keep producing, but it will cease to create. In the digital economy, meaning is currency. Consumers no longer buy only products. They buy alignment, transparency, and purpose. Thus, even the entrepreneur who began from ignorance must evolve into a storyteller, not of fiction, but of reason. Every product, every AI-generated solution must articulate a logic that resonates with human values. The absence of manual skills is irrelevant if philosophical coherence remains strong. The most profound transformation occurs internally, when the unskilled entrepreneur realizes that they have built something functional, profitable, or meaningful they also realize that their identity has shifted. They are no longer defined by what they can do, but by what they can integrate. Their power resides in their ability to merge technologies, coordinate systems, and design experiences through intentionality rather than expertise. This shift marks the birth of a new archetype, the post-skill creator. Such a person does not compete with experts. They collaborate with intelligence, both human and artificial. Their strength is not depth but connection. They weave together the insights of others, the capabilities of machines, and the emergent opportunities of networks. In this synthesis, a new form of intelligence emerges, not personal, not artificial, but relational. The philosophical consequence of this relational intelligence is that it dissolves the myth of isolation. The self-made individual, in the traditional sense, ceases to exist. Every act of creation now exists within an ecosystem of shared computation, open data, and distributed cognition. The entrepreneur's task is to interpret these flows and give them coherent direction. The new measure of success becomes not control, but harmony, the ability to make multiple systems coexist toward a shared outcome. Economically, this represents a silent revolution. The entry barriers to entrepreneurship are collapsing. Where once capital and competence were prerequisites, now clarity and consistency are enough. The currency of the 21st century is not knowledge but alignment. The person who can align digital intelligence with human need possesses more strategic power than one who can merely execute tasks. Yet, there remains an essential danger: comfort. When creation becomes easy, vision can decay. The greatest risk for the skillless entrepreneur is to confuse automation with achievement. The system may continue to produce, but without creative tension, it will stop evolving. Sustainable innovation demands a state of productive discomfort, the continuous challenge of asking whether the process still reflects the original intention. To sustain creation without skill, therefore, one must develop three invisible capacities: curiosity, humility, and direction. Curiosity fuels exploration. Humility prevents arrogance before technology. Direction gives purpose to progress. These qualities cannot be automated because they are not processes, but dispositions. They are the emotional architecture that keeps the system human. From a broader perspective, this evolution signals a shift in the philosophy of work itself. Labor, once synonymous with physical or mental exertion, is now transforming into orchestration. The value of a person is measured not by output, but by insight, by the ability to guide complex processes toward coherent results. The unskilled entrepreneur embodies this transition, becoming the living metaphor of a world that learns faster than it trains. What began as a deficiency thus ends as a design principle. The lack of skills forces the mind to think abstractly, to depend on clarity instead of execution. It compels the individual to engage in meta-thinking, thinking about how thinking itself can create value. This metacognitive entrepreneurship represents the intellectual frontier of the digital age. It unites philosophy and technology, emotion and logic, vision and mechanism. In the end, to start a business with zero skills is not to confess limitation. It is to declare evolution. It is to demonstrate that creation, in its purest form, has never been about mastery, but about curiosity structured through intelligence. And in this realization lies the quiet truth of the modern entrepreneur, that to know nothing, but to question deeply, is often the beginning of everything.